LIDAR is certainly something that's going to be affecting the built environment a lot, I think, for its use in autonomous vehicles, for a capacity to have real-time 3D models of the things that are liable to change. So that's where we're going to get some really, really interesting longitudinal data as well. We've had a good establishment of open data and data sharing. And so I think the next steps are to be further, building up those repositories and getting our machine learning and artificial intelligence chops together so we can start to be mining all that data that's out there and doing some good predictive work.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I welcome back Jack Barton, and we have a great chat about what he has been up to since he was last a guest on the podcast way back in 2018. Jack starts by telling us about his background in architecture, his passion for developing the digital representations of reality, and how this can help make cities better places, before telling us about his current work managing the Geospatial Research, Innovation and Development Lab at the University of New South Wales. Jack shares with us what a smart community is to him. We discuss some of the impacts the COVID-19 pandemic has had on our communities and jobs, and how we can now normalise digital connections more. Jack shares with us his journey into the smart community space, some of the projects he's currently working on, and the importance of basic operational standards in the digital twin space, before he discusses the benefits of LIDAR and how it can be used in communities. We finish our chat discussing further emerging trends of LIDAR and its exciting future. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Jack. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
That is excellent to hear. I'm so excited to have you back on the podcast. And before we talk about last time you were on the podcast, let's start with you. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Well, my background's my ancient history is in agriculture, and then recent ancient history is in architecture. And then following my passion, more and more into developing the digital representations of reality and how they can help us make cities better places. And it's a very exciting time to be working on that right now.
And so you were on the podcast episode 83, which we just worked out was in December of 2018. Which is quite a while ago now. And then we re-released your episode as part of the summer series because it was just that good. Now, I want to get you back on the podcast to see where we have come from back then. We talked a lot about spatial data and how we can use spatial data. But tell us what you've been up to since 2018. Wow, that's quite a long time.
For that time, I've been managing the GRID lab at the University of New South Wales. GRID stands for Geospatial Research, Innovation and Development. And back in 2018, it was in its very, very early days. We just had my boss, Professor Sissi Zlatanova, come over from TU Delft, and she brought one of her postdocs over, and we got another postdoc, and we have a lot of PhD students and Masters by Research students. And so over that time, one important thing is that I was the only, out of a team of sometimes up to 10 to 20 people, I'm the only Australian-born English as a first language person in the team. And so my role was really to introduce everyone to the Australian context, and I had a good network from a previous job at Oran, and it was great to have such high-quality people come over and start working in the Australian context. So really, we had to start from scratch with a lot of talent, but no real runs under our belt. And so since then, we've been doing a lot of grant applications, some of which come through, some of which we spend ages working, and the ARC just says, lol, sorry, you don't get that one. You need to jump a bit higher,
Yeah.
But we've been lucky enough to have a few come through. So we've been able to just demonstrate our skills and build a few full stack developments in the urban modelling side of things. One of our first big ones was a digital twin for the University of New South Wales. And that tied into some existing sensors there from a project that was hung over from the CRC for low carbon living. And that showed us that we could really just do all the techno side of things right from the back end database development right through to a web-based visualization system where you could see in their real-time data the university. So that was a good test bed for us to show off our skills a bit. Now we're currently working on a digital twin for Liverpool with in conjunction with Frontier SI and a host of other partners, including Oran and New South Wales Spatial Services. And that's a great one. Once again, we were lucky enough to inherit a project that had been done at University of Wollongong and UNSW, where they'd set up some temperature sensors and motion sensors and weather sensors. And with that, we've been working on ways to integrate those feeds into 3D representations of that environment. And it's good because the problems haven't been solved yet. There's a lot of things that we're developing algorithms and methods of ways to be able to harness that data. And the exciting thing is that once we've got that data foundation set up, then it'll be very scalable.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to talk more about the projects, but I actually want to lift out first into smart communities. Last time you were on the podcast, we may have just switched over to being the Smart Community podcast because when we recorded, we might have still been the Smart City podcast, right? So I can't remember what question I asked you.
Just become Smart Community, I think.
Yeah, you're right, because it was November 2018 when we did the switch. So what is a smart community to you?
Well, a colleague once said it's somewhere where children can play in the street and you not have to worry. I think that's a good one. Look, at the end of the day, it's about people, but also it's a very exciting time where the technologies are becoming really cool and we're getting a great lot of crossover of different units that we haven't really seen before that are creating such an opportunity that is shaping the way our cities and communities work. And we've seen a big example of that with COVID, as we were just talking about. All of a sudden, everyone has to work from home. The traffic just disappeared from the streets. Look, sure, it's a worldwide catastrophe. That's the virus is, you can't argue with that. But it's interesting some of the impacts where our communities have been smart enough to adapt to that risk and really, I think, realize that we're not stuck to a certain pattern of having to commute into a CBD or other people might, it's I think we've got hopefully a lot more freedoms and some of the, a lot more opportunities that have come out of the technology side during this.
Yeah, the flexibility is there, and I think normalizing that. But as we were talking about too, it's all well and good for us to talk about this in knowledge-based jobs that we can do from anywhere, but actually then thinking about the impacts of, services and entertainment and creativity and hospitality, which we all need, right? We all love, we all want.
And we miss it when it's gone. We really, we don't want to take it for granted.
Exactly. And hopefully once we get out some other side of this, whatever that looks like, that we will then appreciate that more and realize how important that is. And not to say that we didn't before, but I do think, you get into a taking for granted kind of situation. But I'm definitely, fortunately, probably shouldn't even talk about this on the podcast when so many other people are in lockdown at the moment. We have a little bit more freedom up here in Queensland, and I'm just craving going to events and seeing new things that, before I was like, maybe I'll go or, maybe I won't. But now I'm looking for them like, how can I want to go see a comedian or.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
Yeah. And a conference. Yeah, sure. I'll be there. What's it on again? A dinner, all those type of things. And then how we can really then continue to appreciate those things when we do move out into something a bit more like we are used to in 2018 when we first recorded this podcast.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I do think also that hopefully some of those flexibility things that were very necessary during this time then can stick around, so it's easier for people to be able to still live their life in the way that they want to, but earn a living at the same time. And yeah, and I think wellness is another one, just to throw that in there too, of like thinking about, I guess, having deeper conversations about that and the impacts of technology, both negative and positive on that too. So anyway, there's so many things there.
Yeah. Also, I think you're really highlighting the need for a balance between, the economic, zeitgeist and the need for communities and socialization. Is, as you know, there's been a lot of, now that people are working from home a lot and maybe not socializing much, it's easy to see that we're going to have bigger mental health issues. And I think any initiative that can help bring that to people's minds a bit more and increase the support for that sort of thing is very important in these times. And once again, it's one of those things that you don't really miss until it's gone. When you can sort of meet up for a coffee with someone and talk about things, it's a very valuable time. And just to be stuck with your own thoughts, it can be very hard for people, I'm sure, But so I just very grateful for the internet right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then being able to, connect with, like, talked about early on in COVID, like this connection with the global community, making that normalised, but then also like our hyper-local communities as well, that you don't have to choose one or the other. You have both. But then how do you make sure that that balance, like you said, it's not just, you're not just having work conversations, then you're having like friendship conversations or whatever. And that's a different thing to sitting around, a table and having a drink to organising a Zoom. And I found that quite interesting that when, I used to, I do a podcast online, I do these things, but it's all very organised and, there's not a script, but, there's a reason why we're online. Whereas when you catch up with friends, you don't have to have a reason. And so shifting that in your mind as well has been interesting.
Well, yeah, I've enjoyed the virtual dinner parties and the virtual birthday parties and things where everyone, and I got to hang out with, I've got a friend who's been living in New York for 20 years, and it was great. So I could walk into his virtual party and meet a whole lot of New Yorkers, and they were all talking about their, how they were speed walking through the parks and everything, and that's something I had, that would be odd to do, otherwise,
100%. And we'll move on from this in a second. But yeah, like I had a virtual party last night. And so I sent like kind of care packages to my team. They're in Sydney. So we're in Sydney. And the project, we, celebrated the end of a project essentially, which normally we would get together, we'd have a drink and have dinner, whatever. Sent care packages. And then, so we all had our own care packages. And then we got on, had a call, and we played Pictionary and some other game that I wasn't very good at. So I was like, can we play something else that I'm good at, please? And so then played Pictionary, like just some, random thing. And it was just very, like, it was fun and there was no reason for it. And yeah, that would have been very abnormal, a year or so ago. So yeah. Anyway, enough about that. Let's move on. I want to talk more about you and your projects and things that you're working on. Now, before we do that, though, you talked about, what is a smart community, but I'm keen to hear, and you probably talked about this last time, but how did you get into the work that you do now in this space?
Yeah, good question. When I was studying architecture, it was right at the time when CAD was becoming more ubiquitous back in the 90s, and just found it really suited the way I would want to work. I used to like doing a lot of hand drawings and nuts and berries style architecture, but when you've got to look at getting something built and exact quantities and things like that, I really liked the idea of turning a creative vision and having a digital tool help achieve that vision. Then when I finished, I worked as an architect for a while. Then I got a job with the National Parks and Wildlife Service as their in-house architect, doing a bit of asset management work. And from there, I started to have to push CAD to work at a larger scale, making maps and things. And then, of course, got into geographic information systems. And then from there, the word got around that back then I was kind of like the golden child, like I was the guy who was good at computers, and if people needed something done with CAD or GIS or whatever. And so City of Sydney had a big LIDAR, a photogrammetry survey of the city done in the year 2000. And it was such a big complex thing, no one really knew what to do with it. So I got a job to make a map of the city. So it's a funny one, to actually turn a 3D data set into a two-dimensional printed out map. And from that, then I got a scholarship from the Department of Housing to continue on, because now we're talking about the early 2000s. Back then, they still didn't, they had a problem where they had large housing estates on super lots like Redfern, Waterloo, and no maps. And, they literally had to just drive around and point at different places as for their, doing their job. And so we put together a three-dimensional map of the city, of the housing areas, and then said, well, look, it's probably the question there is it's really sort of something that needs a PhD to solve. So I upgraded from a Master's by Research to a PhD, saying, how can you use three-dimensional modelling for the public good? Or is it just a surveillance system that we're creating? That was a bit of a shock I got. I thought, hang on, I'm making a kind of a panopticon here, or how can we have it work for good rather than surreptitious spying kind of things, So that's where the element of community participation came in, and where you had to be able to talk back to the computer or have a two-way conversation rather than just a one-way thing. So, yeah, and then from there, just, the PhD was great. I got to go to conferences and things, and, and then, one thing led to another. I've, done a few jumps. I was in Melbourne for a while working with Auran, putting together a user group for the Auran system and using a whole lot of urban data. And that was nice too, because it broke down the silos. You had a lot of it really has a good social outcomes where you can look at mortality rates or wellness, and you have data and evidence based to make decisions. So that's where that, and working with City Futures Research Centre and SGS Economics and Planning, they were very good institutes where we could have a policy outcome with that. So that was strongly on the human side. And, lately with GRID, it's much more engineering based, but still it's the final outcomes are happy people and good sustainable communities.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you who don't know what Auran is, it's an academic database system, right?
Well, it's
not a database system, it's the data, right?
It's a connection of databases. It's a federated system. So you can log on to auran.org.au, and anyone who's a member of an academic institution at university or government can apply for access. And if you're an industry, you can access map.auran, and you can access the API, and that gives you access to thousands of data sets on everything from wellness and health to road networks, street networks, ABS data, all sorts of stuff. So it's a good repository of data, and they've got a new director, Stuart Barr, and he's very interesting. He comes from the UK, and he's done a lot of work with digital twins. So I'm really excited to see what directions they'll be going in the next few years. All in all, it's a federal project as well, NCRIS funded, and so it's a big science project that's been going on since 2000. After 2010, I started there in 2013. And it's great because it brings together all the different data from the different states and different local governments and things, and reveals a lot of the challenges in doing that too. So it's serving a very good role in supporting research and development in those areas.
Yes, I have used it myself, and it's been really good. So anyway, just thought people might not know what that is. Yeah,
sorry, I've got acronym overload anyway.
It's all right. I just work for the government, and so I also have acronym overload. But then my team goes, "Zoe, what the hell is this?" And so So it's very good. Okay, well, let's talk about you and Grid and tell us about some more details about the projects that you've been working on. First of all, give us a 101 on Grid. You probably did that last time, but just what the aim and the objectives and on what you do. And then, people are very interested in digital twins and particularly the real application of digital twins. So,
yeah, we're a research lab based at the University of New South Wales, led by Professor Sissi Zlatanova. And we do geospatial research, innovation and development. And we cover a lot of different aspects there. Really, it's just to support mostly 3D, anything with 3 dimensions, and how we can help with the analysis and development of those sort of environments. So we've been doing a lot of work with digital twins. We've been doing a lot of work with LIDAR. For those of you that don't know, LIDAR is like radar, only it uses lasers, and you make point clouds with it. And we just found out that, as we were going, we just realized that all our postdocs and students, PhD students, are doing something related to LIDAR somehow. So we've started up a fortnightly little workshop. If anyone's listening to this, just contact me. You're welcome to join. You don't have to be part of the group. It's meant to be a very informal thing, but as it's happened, everyone sort of very formally reports their work that they're doing, but we'll try to loosen that up a bit. But it's just LIDAR's been something that I've been working on a lot, and we all have. When you get the point in space, it's an XYZ coordinate, but then also you can have RGB attached to that, or intensity, or a whole lot of other attributes to that little dot. And when you have a whole point cloud full of these dots, it's quite an intriguing thing. You can do a lot of mathematical analysis and manipulation and value adding to those. Also, you can voxelize them and start to have greater semantic content in as to what those points represent. So there's a lot of research to be done in terms of classification, object detection. So you can just have a point cloud and say, okay, this is a wall, this is a table in a room. That's sort of where we're at with the research still. But once you can then do that, then you can say, okay, well, we've been doing work with evacuation and emergency management, and how you can then use those virtual environments to help with real world problems. So that's where we're starting to get towards the digital twin thing. And we've just had a master's by research student finishing up. He's been using LIDAR, drone-based LIDAR, so lasers on drones. Doesn't get any more fun than that. And that's to measure fuel loads in Australian bushland areas. So by looking at the ground cover and seeing how much flammable material might be there, so we can better organise, risk reduction burns and hazard reduction burns. So that's a very interesting project. Then I'm working on documenting a whole lot of buildings in Japan. Well, and luckily I was over there before the lockdowns came in. Did a whole lot of LIDAR scans of the work of an architect called Shoei Yo. He's a very quirky guy, very interesting architecture, and we'll be putting on an exhibition in November, December, on his work at the Australian Design Centre. So November 30 to December 11, we'll be exhibiting the work of Shoei Yo. And so right now I'm busy just rendering out the point clouds and making some cartoons of his buildings.
Well, that sounds super fun.
It's really nice to be working with the Japanese context, but then also using LIDAR for, when we're looking at all the different projects and how the different students are using LIDAR, it's a really interesting technology. There's so much you can do with it. Heritage applications, emergency management, digital twin. We're working with a group called PAM.co, Progressive Asset Management. And we're doing they do wayfinding technologies, and we're using LIDAR once again for that project, where we've got the units that they put into autonomous cars to help the cars navigate through streets and traffic. But instead of having it on a mobile vehicle, we're using them like surveillance cameras and having just a static LIDAR sensor to detect change. So if a bridge collapses or a tree falls over the road, we've got a real-time 3D model of what's happening. Now, the advantage of using that, when I said surveillance, hopefully should have, shocked a few people, but the benefit of using LIDAR is that you don't reveal personal identifiers. And so it's an anonymous technology. You really just see a person moving around as a blob. Sure, if you increase it and have a specialized application for it, you can do facial recognition and, you can track people and things like that. But we're very keen to have it at a point where you just can't identify individuals, but you can do things like see if a crowd is building up, or you might actually have a crush event or a stampede or something like that would then require some kind of spatial interventions to prevent and save lives. So it's a very exciting project. It should have a bright future, hopefully. So,
Yeah, wow. It sounds like there's lots happening. So in the digital twin space, can you tell us about some of the other applications and the projects in that space?
Yeah, well, we're working on the Digital Twin Challenge with the Smart Cities Council, Australia and New Zealand, and that's a good cohort of people from across the country and New Zealand. And the Smart Cities Council are developing a series of use cases for digital twins, and some of those things include a social worker who tackles homelessness and social impacts, digital engineer who designs buildings, road infrastructure and built assets, or an asset owner, an asset operator, a landscape architect to shape public spaces and places to be livable and sustainable and productive, transport and mobility planners, elected officials who decide and vote on where public funds are allocated or invested, to have a better spatial decision support system that puts the current landscape before a decision maker. I think is a very important thing, and we still, we're working towards that. Other applications, other case studies could be climate scientists, policymakers, lawyers, emergency services. That's a big one. And straight out citizens and tourists, small business owners. So they're the 14 examples that are in the blueprint for digital twins that the Smart Cities Council are developing. And I think it's a very good document. It's open for comment, actually, until August 2021. So if you're keen, you can search for SCCANZ and do a search for the Digital Twin for All document and have a read of it.
We can put a link in the show notes so people can click away and find that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and it's Victoria have just had $35 million put towards developing a digital twin of the state of Victoria. We've got substantial investment in New South Wales with the Spatial Services Unit to develop digital twins across New South Wales. Queensland doing their one, and a lot of councils are interested in them, and they've just heard that the rail network have been built a digital twin themselves, the Australian Rail Track Corporation. So there's a lot of people building digital twins, and that should ring an alarm bell if anyone's worked with a lot of local governments or across state borders. There's a problem with just like GIS data. Everyone will do everything differently, and that's where it's really important for us at the start to come up with basic operational standards. So everyone has the freedom to make their own things as they wish, but as long as you can comply with a certain foundation, then they can all interoperate. And once you get those digital twins interoperating, that'll be really powerful, because you'll get all sorts of data in a spatial context in as quickly as the custodian can be updating that. And if we can be connecting to sensor data as well, or like LIDAR data, then we can have a really important thing. If there's a crisis, maybe some kind of terror event in the city, the decision makers can quickly just log in, see what's happening, where the problems are, how to minimize harm, and how to manage large crowds of people that are having to negotiate their situations. So I think they're very critical tools, and there's a good set of drivers and business cases to be developing digital twins. I guess in a way it's that where we had the smart cities, buzzword, and that's kind of developed into digital twin. But once again, I think, like I said, I used to say about smart cities, it's a bit of jargon, but it's a good bit of jargon. Immediately people can understand what you're talking about and what you mean if you're talking about a digital twin in a built environment context.
And it gives you a platform to talk about the applications of it, right? What's it actually trying to solve? And I think that's what's, important in this space. Yeah, there is some hype and buzz, but it's actually getting to the substance underneath of that, which I think is really important, which is, one of the reasons I started the podcast, so I could talk to people that are actually doing stuff in this space. So
the agriculture sector's also really taken to it. And the thing I like about the agriculture sector is that they don't really muck around. If something's not useful, they don't use it, and if it is useful, they really take to it. And oh boy, there's a lot of drones out there. There's a lot of LIDAR looking at potential yields of crops. And at the Adelaide Arboretum, they're monitoring each of the plants there and seeing how their growth rates are and water usage, which is another big one. It's digital twins for water. Boy, we need that. We can't just let it look after itself, as we've seen in the current state of what's happening.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's it. It's like looking at those applications and then sharing the lessons learnt and then bringing in people that can, really, I guess, input into that and work out what is useful and what isn't useful. And like you said, I think the ag space is a really interesting one to follow and watch, because you're right, they don't muck around. They're not using it because it's new and cool and whatever. They're using it because it's useful and it saves them money, resources, time, increases safety, whatever the case may be, increases yield. And I think that's where we can learn a lot from the ag space, because they're early adopters of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, back when I was out on the property out west, we there's a sheep, cattle and wheat station that I grew up on, and I used to dream on being able to sort of just check the troughs using cameras and not have to muster in boggy country, and now we've got drones with, there's geospatial devices that can give the cattle like a little electric shock if they see an orange cone or something like that. And then they only have to get stung twice, and then they see the orange cone, they don't go near it. And so you can start to have a lot more control over the management of the paddocks that way. And very, very interesting to see how the technology's finally hitting the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm just looking at the time. We better zoom into the future. And can you tell us about the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough. Okay, well, I don't want to try to get too technical about this, but certainly LIDAR is something that's got a huge future, and it's quite exciting if you're a nerd. It's there's still a lot of untapped potential there, and if you like space and how to analyze things that happen in space, really check out LIDAR. And it's quite an accessible technology too. Don't get thrown away by all the deep mathematics that you might see in some of the papers and things. It's becoming more and more accessible. I think the latest iPhone now has got LIDAR detectors. Actually, I know the latest iPhone has them. And so LIDAR is certainly something that's going to be affecting the built environment a lot, I think, for its use in autonomous vehicles, for a capacity to have real-time 3D models of the things that are liable to change. So that's where we're going to get some really, really interesting longitudinal data as well. We've had a good establishment of open data and data sharing, and so I think the next steps are to be further, building up those repositories and getting our machine learning and artificial intelligence chops together so we can start to be mining all that data that's out there and doing some good predictive work. Because, there's many crises that we're facing with. There's the COVID thing, and there's also environmental change. And with the increased risk of bushfires and flooding and things like that. So we're really going to, when you say not discussed enough, I guess certainly we're talking about how, we're using technology in very good ways to help manage those events. But I think, there's a lot more we can develop it and to make lives safer and to help sustainability of our environments that we're creating. So I think that really has to be, I guess, the take-home message is, sustainability really is a crisis. It may be, we've become a bit numb to that, but if you're looking at the way we've got such observable change and such, for leaders, such a disregard for the evidence that's before their eyes, we really have to take matters into our own hands and be able to manage it in their absence, and so Yeah, I think it's once again, I think that the technologies right now have the potential to be very empowering, but also there's still that risk that they can be used for mass control and for more subversive reasons. So got to be active and be involved and know what the technologies do and how they work, just so you can make that decision for yourself.
Yeah, like you said earlier, that's why you got into the space of, community participation. It was like, you can use it for good or bad, but how do we then have enough people in the space for the critical mass is for good, and that we're involving the community and we're working out what it is we want, what the community needs and wants, and that we can all kind of be engaged in the space and be involved in the space as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Jack, it's been so great to chat with you. I feel like we could talk a long, long time, but we do have to wrap up there. And, well, we'll wrap up after I ask you this question, which is, how can people connect with you?
Well, my email is jack.barton, all lowercase, at unsw.edu.au. I think that's the best way. And my, I haven't touched it for 20 years, I think, but my sort of personal online brochure for my work that I do here and there is jbdd.com. That's Juliet Bravo Delta Delta. But I'll have to update that website one day.
Cool. Well, I look forward to putting links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. And I'll also look that up.
JBDD on Twitter as well.
Yes. Very good. We'll put the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. Thank you again for coming back onto the podcast. And I look forward to talking again real soon.
I look forward to it.
Talk soon. Bye.
See ya. Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.